Before the great kingdoms of Khazad-dûm and Erebor, there was another race of dwarves, a forgotten people whose final, dying curse would poison the greatest treasure of the elves.
Their story is not a grand saga of fallen cities. It is a tragedy of genocide, so personal and slow, it makes the fall of Moria feel like a distant, impersonal cataclysm. It is the story of a slow, bitter extermination that ended with one broken family and a hoard of cursed gold. Long before the rising of the sun and moon, in the deeps of the Elder Days, a schism occurred in the great dwarven mansions of the Blue Mountains. From the famed cities of Noegyth and Beleg, certain clans were driven out, exiled for reasons now lost to time. They were lesser craftsmen, perhaps, or dissidents who would not bow to the Mountain Kings. These exiles wandered west, a lost and diminished people, and were the very first of their kind to enter the great lands of Beleriand. They came into a world that was empty of their own kin and empty of men. Even the elves had not yet spread far from the starlit shores. These dwarves were utterly alone. Over uncounted years of isolation, they changed. They became smaller in stature, their skills in smithing and masonry waned, and their use of stealth and secrecy grew. They became a shadow folk, their own grand language of Khazad-dûm becoming a broken dialect. They were the Noegyth Nibin, the Petty-dwarves, and they were forgotten by all. Then the elves came, the Sindar, the grey elves of Beleriand, spread through the forests and hills. In their long twilight under the stars, they encountered these strange, hunched creatures. They were squat, secretive, and spoke a guttural tongue that no elf could comprehend. Seeing their crude tools and furtive ways, the Sindar did not recognize them as a sentient people, as the children of the Valar Okila. To them, the Petty-dwarves were merely a kind of clever beast, an animal that walked on two legs and sometimes stole from their larders. And so, the elves hunted them. This was not a war born of malice, but an extermination born of ignorance, a tragedy of profound misunderstanding. The Petty-dwarves, who had known only solitude, now knew only fear. They were pursued through the forests like game, their secret halls were invaded, and their people were slain without pity or parley. This persecution festered in the hearts of the few survivors, planting a seed of hatred for all the fair folk that would grow into a dark and poisonous tree. When the Noldoran elves returned from Valinor, their light and power were great, and the Petty-dwarves feared and loathed them above all others. They saw in the Noldor's brilliance an echo of the cruelty of the Sindar, and they hid from them, their numbers dwindling until they had all but vanished from the world. By the time of the great wars of Beleriand, it was believed they were entirely extinct, but they were not. In the heart of Beleriand, upon the stony hill of Amon Rûdh, the last remnant of the Petty-dwarves endured. There, in a warren of secret caves known as Bar-en-Danwed, lived Milim and his two sons, Ibun and Kimim. Milim was ancient, even by the reckoning of dwarves. He was the last lord of a people reduced to 3 souls, the sole living library of their sorrows, their language, and their unending grievance against the world. His heart was a stone, hardened by ages of grief. But how could this one broken family, the last echo of a forgotten people, bring about the ruin of a hero blessed by the Valar and an entire kingdom of elves? The answer lies not in power, but in a desperate bargain forged in darkness and blood. Into this land came Turin, son of Hurin, the tragic hero of the First Age. Cursed by the Dark Lord Morgoth himself, Turin was a wanderer and an outcast. He had gathered to him a band of desperate men, the Gaurwaith, and they lived as wolves, hunted by orcs and spurned by the elves of Doriath. Seeking a defensible lair, they came to the southern eaves of the forest of Brethil, and to the lands around the stony hill of Amon Rûdh. It was there, in a driving storm, that Turin's men captured Miam. The old dwarf was terrified, begging for his life in a broken form of the common speech. He saw death in the eyes of these grim men. In his desperation, he made an offer: his life, in exchange for guidance to his hidden home, a secret fastness where they might find shelter from their enemies and the cruel weather. Turin, seeing no other option, agreed to the dwarf's terms. A bargain was struck: Mim's life for his home. Mikim led them into the heart of the hill, through secret passages, and into the dark, cramped halls of his people. The air was stale, thick with the dust of ages and the ghosts of a dead race. It was nothing like the grand halls of men or the bright mansions of the elves. It was a tomb that still housed the living. He had given them his home. He had named it Bar-en-Danwed, the house of ransom, for the price of his own life. But Turin and his men would soon learn the price was far, far higher. As Mim's eyes adjusted to the firelight, he saw what had happened. During his capture, one of Turin's men, an archer named Androg, had loosed a shaft in haste.
That arrow had found its mark not in Mishim, but in his son, Kinsim, who had been following his father. The boy was dead. The silence in the cavern was shattered by the old dwarf's terrible, heart-wrenching grief.
Turin, the great warrior, the bane of orcs, stood frozen, the horror of his company's deed washing over him.
In that moment, Turin's doom-haunted heart was filled with a deep and genuine pity.
He knelt before the grieving father and swore an oath. He would offer his service and friendship to Mikem to atone for the death of his son. He would repay the blood debt with his own loyalty, and he would help Mirim keep his last son, Ibun, safe from all harm.
Milm, looking upon the mighty and sorrowful warrior, accepted his offer. But his grief had already curdled into something else. Beneath the veneer of acceptance, a cold and patient hatred took root. His people had been hunted and slain by the tall folk for centuries. Now they had taken one of his last 2 children. The law of the dwarves was unyielding. A life for a life. And Missim, the last lord of the Noegyth Nibin, would see that debt paid in full.
For a time, an uneasy peace settled upon Amon Rûdh.
Turin and his men used the hill as an unbreachable fortress. His fame grew, and tales of the new captain who defied Morgoth spread through Beleriand. The land around the hill became known as Dor Quarthal, the land of bow and helm, for Turin's prowess and the great helm he wore, a relic of his house that struck terror into the hearts of his enemies. He believed he was building a bastion against the Dark Lord. He was a fool. He was building his own tomb on the bones of a dead race, and its last living son was about to hand Morgoth the key. Turin's fame brought an unwelcome visitor to Mim's home. The great elf lord, Beleg Cuthalion, Turin's truest friend. Seeing an elfanoldo, as he wrongly believed, walking freely in his sacred halls, sharing counsel with the man whose soldier had killed his son, drove the poison of Mim's hatred ever deeper into his heart. He said nothing. He simply watched and waited. Morgoth's net was closing.
The Dark Lord did not suffer a thorn in his side to remain for long, and his spies soon learned the general location of the helm of Dor Lomin. Orc patrols scoured the lands around Amon Rûdh, searching for the hidden lair. One evening, Miamilm and his last son, Igobun, went out from their caves to gather wild roots for the winter stores. They were delayed. As darkness fell, they did not return. A patrol sent by Turin found them, but the orcs had found them first. Migsim and Ibun were captives. The orc captain, recognizing the old dwarf from descriptions, presented him with an ultimatum. He could die a slow and agonizing death, and watch his last child be tortured before him, or he could lead them to the hidden entrance of Bar-en-Danwed, his life, and the life of his son, for the life of Túrin Turambar. But what is the true price of vengeance? For Mijim, this was not a choice between betrayal and death.
It was a choice between his son's life and the life of the man whose company had taken his other son. The law of the dwarves was simple: a life for a life.
The orcs were not his masters in this moment. They were his instrument. The fear on his face was real, but beneath it, an ancient, patient hatred burned with the cold fire of a dying star.
He had sworn an oath of service to Turin, yes, but he had sworn an older, deeper oath to his own blood. The bargain was struck, not in desperation, but in final, terrible judgment. While Turin and his men slept, believing themselves secure in their stone fortress, Milm led the forces of Angband to their door. A storm broke over the hills, its fury a fitting shroud for the treachery to come. The rain lashed down, washing the world clean and muffling the sounds of the approaching doom. Inside the halls of Bar-en-Danwed, only one soul was awake. Beleg the bowman, friend to Turin, did not trust the silence of the storm. An unease had settled upon him, a shadow in his heart that he could not name. He rose, his bow in hand, and moved quietly towards the entrance tunnel. He was too late. Mim had shown them the way. The orcs poured into the house of ransom like a foul tide, their scimitars and jagged spears thirsty for blood. The slaughter was swift and merciless. Turin's men, roused from sleep, were cut down before they could even grasp their swords. The caverns that had been a sanctuary became a charnel house, echoing with the screams of dying men and the guttural laughter of orcs. Beleg fought with the grace and fury of the Eldar. His great bow, Belthronding, sang its deadly song, and a wall of orc dead rose before him. But he was one against a legion. The din of battle finally roused Turin. He seized his helm and his dreadful black sword and burst into the fray. And for a moment, the tide turned. Gurtang, the iron of death, flashed in the firelight, cleaving through orc flesh and bone as if it were parchment. The orcs, who had moments before been jeering in triumph, recoiled in terror before the demonic figure of the dragon helm. He was not a man. He was a tempest of destruction, an avatar of wrath. But courage and might alone cannot defy an army. As he fought, his back to a stone pillar, a hulking orc captain crept up behind him and brought a great iron-shod mace crashing down upon the back of the dragon helm. The world exploded in a flash of white, and Turin, son of Hurin, knew no more. Mim watched it all unfold. He saw the men who had shared his hearth and home slaughtered. He saw the great captain, the helm of Nauglamír, fall like a common soldier. The blood debt was paid. His son, Him, was avenged, but the dwarfs' victory was a bitter one. For the orcs were not content with their prize. They took Beleg, the elf that Mikum so hated, and they did not kill him. They crucified him against the pillar, leaving him to die a slow, agonizing death as a warning. They did the same to Androg, the very man whose arrow had slain Milim's son. A cruel, poetic justice that turned the dwarf's stomach. This was not the clean vengeance of his people. This was the defilement of the enemy. Then, as swiftly as they had come, they were gone, dragging their captive into the storm-lashed night, on the long road north to the freezing hell of Angband. Silence fell upon Bar-en-Danwed, a silence broken only by the dripping of blood and the low moans of the dying. Miriam and his son Ibun were left alone, masters once more of a house of ghosts. He had his home back. He had his vengeance. He had saved his last son. But as he looked upon the ruin he had wrought, he must have wondered, had he truly won anything at all? But the orcs had made a fatal error. They had underestimated the endurance of the elves. For hours, Beleg hung upon the stone, drifting in and out of consciousness. Yet his spirit did not break. With a strength born of love and desperation, he began to fight back. One by one, he tore his limbs free, pulling the cruel iron from his own body in an act of supreme will. He fell to the floor, broken and bleeding, but alive, and filled with a single, all-consuming purpose. His friend, Turin, was in the hands of the enemy. He tended to his grievous wounds as best he could. He could not stay. This place was a tomb now, tainted by treachery and death. He gathered what he could. But as he searched, his eyes fell upon something lying near the cold hearth. It was a small, exquisitely crafted harp, Turin's most treasured possession from his days in Doriath, a memory of a gentler time, a painful reminder of the man Turin was meant to be, before the curse of Morgoth had twisted his life into this grim tragedy. With the harp stowed safely in his pack, Beleg Cuthalion, the strongbow, turned his back on the ruins of Amon Rûdh. He limped out into the dawn, following the foul, muddy tracks of the orcs as they led north, always north, into the blighted lands of the enemy, toward the iron peaks of Angband itself. His hunt had begun, but he was not the only one hunting in that desolate land. Something else stirred in the shadows, a thing of misery and despair. This creature had once been a prince of Nargothrond, Gwindor, son of Gillen. Captured in the battle of unnumbered tears, he had toiled for years as a slave in the mines of Morgoth, his body broken and his mind scarred by unspeakable horrors. Having recently escaped, he was now a wraith haunted by his past, crawling through the wilderness on a faint, desperate hope of seeing his home once more. He too had seen the orc band pass, and in a moment of crazed, suicidal courage, had begun to follow them, hoping for a chance to inflict some small measure of revenge upon his tormentors. When he saw the tall, gray-clad elf moving with such speed and purpose, Gwindor's heart filled with terror. He mistook him for one of Morgoth's hunters, sent to drag him back to the pits. For who else but a servant of the enemy would dare to walk so openly, so close to the borders of Angband? Gwindor shadowed him for days, a ghost flitting between the trees, torn between the terror of recapture and a desperate curiosity. But Beleg's elven senses were too keen. He had felt the eyes upon his back for miles. "Come out!" he called, his voice rough with exhaustion and pain. "I know you are there. Show yourself, or I will count you among the orcs I hunt." The wretched figure stumbled into the open. Beleg turned, his eyes narrowing as he took in the ragged elf. This was no orc. This was one of the Eldar. Though so marred by torment he was barely recognizable. "Who are you?" Beleg demanded, his voice softening with a dawning pity. The creature collapsed to its knees. "I was Gwindor, son of Gillen," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "A lord of Nargothrond. Now, I am a slave who has forgotten the sun." Beleg saw in Gwindor's eyes the very fate he was racing to save Turin from. "I am Beleg," he said gently. "I hunt the orcs who have taken my friend." Gwindor's eyes widened. "The orcs? I saw them. I have been following them. They had a captive with them, a man of great stature." "Yes," Beleg urged, his hope flaring. "Where did they go?" Gwindor pointed with a trembling hand. "Not north toward Angband, but deeper into the dreadful forest. They made camp, Not far from here, on the edge of the highlands, they grow careless, thinking themselves safe in this evil place. A plan began to form in Beleg's mind. A desperate, reckless plan. He could not fight an entire company of orcs, not wounded as he was. But if he and Gwindor could sneak into the camp under the cover of the forest's unnatural darkness, they might be able to free Turin. It was a fool's hope, but it was the only hope they had. Together, the two elves, one a mighty warrior brought low by his wounds, the other a broken prince given a new purpose, crept forward into the heart of the forest of Nightshade. They found the camp easily enough. The orcs, deep within a forest they believed was an ally, had posted few sentries. Most were gathered around a great fire, roaring foul songs, and drinking of vile liquor. And there, tied to a dead tree at the edge of the firelight, was Turin. He was stripped to the waist, his back bleeding from their whips, but he was unconscious, slumped against his bonds. Beleg drew his great sword, Anglachel, a blade made from a meteorite, the mate, to Turin's own Gurthang. He motioned for Gwindor to wait. The plan was simple. He would be a silent shadow, a phantom of death. He would eliminate the sentries one by one, then slip in, cut Turin free, and vanish back into the night. With the sentries dispatched, Beleg crept toward the tree where Turin was bound. The noise of the reveling orcs covered the sound of his approach. He reached his friend, his heart aching at the sight of him so broken and helpless. He raised his sword to sever the ropes, and in that moment, the curse of Turin, which had slept for a short while, awoke once more to turn hope into despair. As Anglachel cut through the thick ropes, the blade slipped in his weary hand, and its point pricked Turin's foot. Turin, trapped in a nightmare of torment and shadow, was jolted awake not into salvation, but into a final, panicked terror. He did not see his friend in the darkness. He saw only a dark figure with a blade, another orc coming to torture him in the night. With a great and terrible cry, believing he was being attacked yet again, Turin sprang to his feet. His roar of fury and defiance echoed through the entire camp. The drunken orcs were instantly silenced, their heads snapping toward the sound. Beleg froze, the black sword in his hand, his face a portrait of horror and disbelief as he realized his fatal error. Before he could even speak his friend's name, Turin, in his madness, leaped upon him. He grappled with the shadow figure, wresting the sword from his hand. He did not recognize the face of his dearest friend. He saw only an enemy. He saw only the black blade of Anglachel, the iron of death, glinting in the firelight. And with all the strength of the House of Hador, he brought it down. Turin! The great elf fell, the black sword standing from his heart. For a moment, there was a stunned silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then the orcs, realizing what had happened, let out a roar of hideous, jeering laughter. Their prisoner had done their work for them. The laughter died in Turin's throat. The madness fled from his eyes, replaced by a horror so absolute it stole the air from his lungs. He saw the face of Beleg Cathalion, his shield and his guide, looking up at him with love even in death. He looked at his own hands, covered in his friend's blood. That cry of anguish drew the orcs forward, their cruel swords raised. But even as they closed in, a second figure burst from the shadows. It was Gwindor. Seeing Turin helpless and lost, he ran to his side, grabbing the dazed man and hauling him to his feet. Gwindor dragged the unresisting, silent Turin away from the firelight and back into the suffocating darkness of Tarnufuin. He did not look back. He fled with the son of Hurin, leaving the body of the greatest woodsman of the elves to lie in the mud among his enemies. All that day Turin sat, silent and motionless, his mind locked away in a prison of grief. When evening came, Gwindor, fearing for them both, crept back to the scene of the tragedy. The orcs were gone. He found Beleg where he had fallen. He buried the elf lord there, in a shallow grave, and placed his bow beside him. But the sword, Anglachel, he took. It was a blade of great doom, and he felt it was not right that it should lie in the earth. He returned to Turin, who still had not moved. "This is Anglamekkel," Gwindor said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "The iron of death. It serves you still." And Turin took the blade, but he did not speak. He stared at its dark edge, and it seemed to him that the blood upon it cried out. Thus ended Beleg Strongbow, truest of friends, by the hand of him whom he loved most. This was the curse of Morgoth in its fullness, that all Turin sought to save he would destroy, and all who loved him he would bring to ruin. The tale of Túrin Turambar is far from over. His path leads onward, into deeper shadow and greater sorrow, a journey paved by the consequences of this one terrible night. To witness the next chapter in this saga of heroes and heartbreak, And to ensure you don't miss a single moment of Middle-earth's first age, subscribe to the channel. The _Silmarillion_